Hello, welcome to another episode of the Fundamentals of Programming from Programmer City. My name is Destiny Brochable. Now, in this episode, we're going to be talking about input statements. In the previous episode, we've talked about output statements and we've talked about variable declaration statements and we talked about variables. And we saw that for us to make use of variables, we can either do our assignments, which we've talked about already in one of the previous episode, and we also said the second method to use variables, that is to store data into variables, is through input statements. Okay, so what is an input statement? Basically, an input statement is a command or instruction that tells the computer to accept data through available devices, usually the keyboard. Okay, accept data through available input devices. Now, when I say available input devices, what I simply mean is an input statement does not only covers inputs that are gotten from the keyboard as an input device, but rather sometimes we have other input devices that we can use to accept data into our program, such as scanners and cameras and other input devices you can think of. For instance, if I'm developing a software that will have to make use of biometric, let's say fingerprints, to determine the user or the bar data of a user, definitely I'm going to write the program to involve input statements that will be able to collect data from any biometric device I'm using to feed in data into my program. Likewise, if I'm writing a software, if I'm developing a software that will have to, collect data from a scanner, the same thing I'm going to do. I'm going to use input statement that to be able to synchronize with the scanner in such a way that they will be able to access data that are coming from the scanner. Now, remember what we're doing. We are doing the fundamentals of programming, so we're not really going to look into advanced concepts of such. We're going to be sticking to the standard input using the keyboard, that is accepting data from our keyboard. Okay, this way we can keep this simple and basic so that everybody will be able to comprehend. Okay, so I think most of the programs that you're going to come across as a beginner will only be working with input gotten from the user, either through an interface, and whichever interface you're going to see as a beginner is going to be working with the input from the keyboard. Okay, so let's just keep things simple. Okay, now we're going to see the program in the different programming language that we've been using. I'm going to start from the QBasic as usual. So let me launch my QBasic. Okay, so this is my QBasic environment. And before I do this, I think let me open Notepad so that you see the syntax clearly. Okay, so if I want to accept data on my QBasic, what I'll simply do, I'll simply write input, okay, the particular variable I want to impute into. Okay, so this is how I impute data in QBasic. Okay, then sometimes when I write this, it will be very, very difficult for you as a beginner to really understand what's going on here. Okay, so I'm going to edit the code or modify the code in such a way that it will be easier for us to comprehend. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some of the things we've done before about the the output statements, the variable declarations, and all of that. Okay, so we'll put everything together and maybe write a simple program to illustrate this whole thing. Okay, but first of all, before we write that simple program, let's first of all see what's going on here. Now let's assume I have a variable. Let's say I declare a variable. Let's say dim a as integer, for instance. Okay. Now this a as a variable, like I told you in the previous videos, that we can also store data into it through inputs. Okay, so now in this time around, instead of making a kind of an assignment like this, let's say I assign 5 to a. Now this time around, we want to impute a value into a instead of assigning. So what we're going to do here is simply to say impute a. Okay, so when we say impute a, sorry, now anything the user enters here automatically will be stored into a. So if we come and say print a, automatically is going to print the value that has been imputed in the previous instruction. Sorry about my semicolons. Okay, so that is just it. So if we impute a, then print a, you see that the value that we imputed here is what is going to be printed here. Okay, now let's see how the program is in our QBasic. So I'll simply go back to my QBasic and write the program. First of all, I'll clear my screen. Then after clearing the screen, I'll simply say I'll declare dim a as integer. Okay, then when I declare a as integer, I'll simply say impute a. Okay, now when I say impute a, the next thing I'll do, I'll say print a. Okay, so if I say print a, now what's happening here is the first line is a command telling the computer to clear the screen where it's going to print the output, then declare the variable called a as integer, then imputed a value. That means in this case it will allow the user, the person using the program, to insert any value of his choice into the program, then we'll print the value that was entered by the user here. Okay, so if we run this program and we'll see how it is, you see that automatically what's happening here is the program is waiting for me to impute data. Okay, so I'll simply type any data of my choice. Since it's an integer, I'll make sure that I'll put a number without a whole without a decimal place. Okay, so I'll simply say maybe 5 and I press enter. Automatically it prints 5. Okay, so this program is working fine, but the little issues with it is you might not really know what the program is all about. Okay, because the program is not actually user friendly. Okay, so for us to make it user friendly, we can first of all tell the user something like print a message to the user like enter any integer value. Okay, so if we tell the user enter any integer value, at least the program will be a little bit friendly, because here when I run the program, you see it's going to tell you enter any integer value. Okay, so if I enter any integer value and press enter, it just prints the value for me. Okay, now making it more interesting, I can simply add some write-up to it, to like the value you entered is. Okay, now when I say the value you enter is, I'll simply put a comma. Okay, when I put a comma and I run the program again, okay, let's say I enter this value, it's going to print the value you entered is 2. Okay, because I just entered 2. You see how interesting it is. Okay, now I can even make it more simpler by removing this print statement here, because the input statement have the ability to also have some string within it. That means within the input statement here, I can simply open a quote and I said enter any integer value. Okay, then separating that string from my variable, I can use comma just like what I did at the bottom, or I can use semicolon. Okay, now talking about the comma or the semicolon, these are the things I always say you should watch out for, because remember we said that this programming, and when we talk about programming language, is a language just like every other language, and when you are learning any language, you should put into consideration the grammatical structure of that language, and some of these things you're seeing makes up the grammatical structure. You should know that whenever you want to add a string, let's say a message to an input or to a print statement, you should close that message in a quote, and if you are appending a variable to that message, you either use a colon, a semicolon rather, or you use a comma. Okay, and this practice is called concatenation. We're going to see it in more the more modern languages that we're going to be looking at, like in Java or in Python. We're going to see how we make concatenation in those languages. But here in QBasic, we either use a comma or we use a quote. Okay, now the difference between the two is that the comma is going to give you a space like a tab. That means it's going to give you a much space after the printed string, that is the printed message, but the semicolon is going to just give a single space between the printed string and the variable. Okay, so with this, let's test our program. Is going to run exactly the same way it ran before. Okay, so you see in this case the cursor blinking in the same line with where you have the string. Okay, so if I enter the value there and I press enter, you see how it is. The space here between the string you printed, the value you entered is 90. You see the space between the is and 90 is much, because there we use a comma instead of a semicolon. Okay, now basically this is how an input statement work. Okay, now in this program we did the variable declaration, which we've done in the previous video. Then we did an input statement and we accepted data through the keyboard and stored that data into A. Then at the last instruction we printed the data with a particular message. Okay, so we're going to see this program in other programming languages too. Okay, now quick one, let's just go over to Python and see how this same thing is done in Python. So I'll open up my Python IDE, which is my PyCharm. Okay, okay, so this is my Python IDE. So remember, in Python we said that you don't necessarily need to declare the variables. We can just use the variable on the go. Okay, so that means if I have a variable called a here, I can simply say a. In this time around, what I'm going to do is a is equal to, okay, then I'll put an input statement. Okay, input. Then on the input I can simply just put something like a message here, just the message I did on the QBasic, enter value or an integer value. Okay, an integer value. Okay, so then the next thing I'm going to do here is to print the integer value. So I'll simply say print. Okay, then I'll say the value, okay, you entered is. Then here, for me to add the variable to it, I cannot do this, okay, just like I did in QBasic, and I cannot do this also. Okay, I think Python, yeah, I can do this in Python, yeah. Okay, but this is not really the concatenation in Python, because for me to concatenate this, I will use a plus symbol. Okay, a plus symbol is used for concatenation. So if I also do this semicolon in Python, sorry, this comma in Python, I think Python, what it will do is also it will tab my variable. Okay, that means the value of the variable that will be printed will be tabbed, and a lot of space will be given from the string we printed there with the a. Okay, so let's see how it is, then we'll see how the concatenation is. Okay, so if it asks me to enter a value, this is my output. Let's say I enter a value 70 and I press enter. You see the value entered is 70. Okay, so now if we are to change this to the concatenation symbol, which is the plus symbol, and run the program again, now watch the difference. Okay, so I'll simply say a is equals 70 and I print. Okay, you see that the space is a little bit closer than the former one, but whichever way, the major thing we're trying to look at here is input statement, and this is the input statement here. Okay, so what happened here is this is just a message which printed this, enter a value, then it will allow the user to enter any value, and the value the user enter will be stored in this variable called a. Okay, now when it stores this value, the user enter into the variable a, then on the next instruction we said it should output, that is print this message along with the variable. Okay, so it's as simple as that in Python. Just with 2 lines we are able to do that same thing we did in QBasic in multiple lines. Okay, so this is just how simple it is in Python. Now the next thing we're going to look at is it how it is done in Java. So I'll open up my Java IDE. Okay, okay, so this is my Java IDE. So I'll just open one of the projects we've been using. I think it's this intro. Okay, so just clear this up. Okay, I think I was still going to make use of this. Okay, now in Java, I told you everything we'll be doing in Java will be inside this public static void main. Okay, that's the main method. Okay, and also said that I'm going to explain everything before this main method, where we get to the concept of object-oriented programming. Okay, so that means I'll also declare a variable in Java, just like what I did in QBasic and in Python, called a as integer. Okay, so this time around, what I'm supposed to do here now is to accept the value in Java. Okay, so like in QBasic or in Python, for instance, I just did a is equal to input something. Okay, now the reason why I usually suggest we use different language, or let me say usually I normally use, sorry, the reason I normally use different language rather for the different concept of programming is because of this. Okay, now some of this language actually tells you how difficult it is. Okay, especially when we talk about languages like Java. Okay, tell you how difficult it is to synchronize your input devices, okay, with your program, the program you're writing. Okay, now in the case of this input, there is something extraordinary that we're going to do about Java that is very easier compared to other programming languages, especially the ones we've looked at already. Okay, now in Java, for you to impute data, that means for you to accept data from your user through the keyboard. Okay, now you must first of all import a library. Okay, there are what we call libraries in programming. Okay, now I think in a separate video I'm going to explain what libraries are, but just for the sake of this, you should just see libraries as other programs that have been written that have different functionality within them, okay, that you can bring into your own program in order to make use of some of the functionalities that have been done in those libraries. Okay, now for us to be able to for us to be able to accept data from the user. Okay, now our program ordinarily does not have access to our computer keyboard out of the blue. Okay, so but there is a library called scanner, okay, that can enable our program accept input from the standard input stream. Okay, so for us to use it, we have to bring the program, that's the library, into this program. Now how do we bring an external library? Okay, let me remove this comment here. Okay, now before your public class, okay, before the public class declaration, you simply use a keyword called import. Okay, now when you say import, you have to put the path to the library you're trying to install. Okay, now the scanner library is inside the Java standard library. Okay, so for us to import anything from the Java standard library, we simply say import Java. Okay, so when we say Java, then we say dot. When you say dot, it's going to give you all the packages that you can find in the Java standard library. Okay, we're still going to talk about this more when we start doing the GUI, because at the end of this class, I'm going to introduce you to the use of GUI, and we're going to create packages, and we're going to create classes. Okay, so with that, you understand what these packages mean and how we can create classes within packages. Okay, that means when we are dealing with software development using Java. At least I'm going to introduce you to that at the end of this series. Okay, so we're going to say we want the package. Where is the package that the scanner can be found in? All these things you're seeing are different packages in the Java standard library. Okay, but the scanner can be found on the package called util. So we simply say util. Okay, so when we say util, you're going to see different classes and different things that you can find on the util package. Okay, and one of those things is the scanner class. Okay, this is the scanner class here. Okay, so you simply select the scanner class. Okay, now when we select the scanner class, we've successfully imported the scanner into our program. Okay, now that is not all. Importing the scanner into our program is not really everything we need to do, because we also need to do what they call instantiation of an object from the scanner class. That is instantiating an object of scanner. Okay, now these are advanced terms that will be used when we come to object-oriented programming. Okay, so when we start looking at object-oriented programming, we're going to see what objects are, we're going to see what object instantiation are. Okay, now for a layman term, as we said, we've been doing this for the beginners, so we're going to try to stick to terms that we as layman, if I'm a layman for instance, I'm seeing myself as a layman, will be able to comprehend what is actually going on here. Okay, now the first thing first, I've said this, that we are bringing in an external program. That is, this is a program that has been written somewhere and we are importing it into this program. Okay, I think this one is as simple as ABC. Okay, now the next thing is the instantiation I'm talking about. As a layman, how you're going to see it, you can simply see it as the scanner that you brought in is simply like a parent and you're trying to create a child of it. That means you're trying to build a new scanner. Remember I said the scanner is a program that has been written by someone else, or by that is written somewhere else. Okay, and we are bringing it in. Okay, now when we bring it in, we are trying to create something like a replica of the scanner, or something that have all the ability of the scanner. Okay, so that is what we're going to do. That's creating a new scanner. We can just put it like creating a new scanner. Okay, so how do we create the new scanner? Okay, so we'll simply say scanner. Okay, sorry, scanner. Okay, then let me call the name of the new scanner input. Okay, now what I did here, is not actually the main object instantiation that I want to do, okay? But I just want to explain it gradually so that you can understand it, okay? So doing this is just like I'm declaring a variable of scanner. Like you can see, int a, just like when we say int a, okay, we simply mean that a is an integer variable, okay? So it's something similar to that we're doing here, that input scanner. That means this input, you can see it as a variable, but it's not actually a variable, but trying to understand it, trying to explain it in a way that you understand it as in a layman terms, okay, you can see it as a variable of scanner for now, okay? Like I said, we'll see all these things when we get to object-oriented programming, okay? But for now, you can see it as a variable of scanner, okay? So that means we're declaring an input, okay? That means this guy can be anything of your choice. I can use A, B, C, okay? I can use G, E, T. I can use anything of my choice as a name, okay? But since what we are trying to do is input, okay, so what I'll simply do, let's call it input now. Okay, why I call it input here is because in Java, input is not a keyword, okay? But because if input is a keyword, I cannot use this input as a name of scanner, okay? So that is why I'm using input here. And another reason I'm using input is because what we are trying to achieve is we are trying to accept data from the user. That means we're trying to write an input statement, okay? So when I do this, now it doesn't end here. I'll simply tell the program that even though this is like a variable of scanner, I'll tell the program that I'm creating it from a new scanner, okay? That means this guy is a scanner, but is a new scanner, not just a scanner, a new scanner. Like I said earlier, it's just like you're creating something, I like to say a replica of scanner, okay? A new replica of scanner, okay? Now, remember when we are trying to do our output, we did system dot out, okay? Now, and I said that this is the standard output stream, okay? So in this case of scanner, we also want to use the standard input stream to accept the data, okay? Now, this standard input stream is what tells the program that use the standard output or use the standard input, and the standard input is simply the keyboard, okay? So we simply declare the standard. Instead of out this time around, we say in, okay? So I will say system.in inside the scanner here, okay? So we're simply telling the program that, okay, this input that is a child or that is a mirror of scanner or a new object of scanner, okay, we want it to be using this standard input to accept data, okay? So if we do that, that means we've finally declared a scanner object that we can now use to accept input from the user, okay? Now, for us to accept the input, we'll simply say a, okay, just like we did in Python, okay? We'll simply say input, okay? Now, in Python, we just say input, and we did something like this, okay? Okay, but this time around, we're not just going to use that, rather we'll simply say dot, okay? Now we'll say next int, okay? Now why I did next int here is because this particular variable we are trying to accept data into is an integer variable, okay? So this is another benefit of using the scanner, okay? Because in the scanner here, the scanner have different methods of accepting different kind of values from the user, okay? Accepting different kind of value from the user, that means it can tell the user if you are using an integer just like what we're doing here, you can say next int, okay? Then if we're using string, if we're using other data type, you have ways of collecting it from the scanner, okay? Unlike the Python, there is something I didn't tell you while we're dealing with the Python. Let's go back to the Python. Okay, though it works perfectly, but the thing you should know here in this Python is that this a actually is not an integer variable. Okay, because if we are to print the type of a, you see that a is actually a string. Okay, let's say a. Okay, so then let's run the program. Okay, so if I say 40, for instance, you can see that a is actually a string. Okay, and that is one of the reasons why we didn't get an error here, because assuming this a is an integer, we cannot actually concatenate just the way we did it here. Okay, so that means for us to make it an integer, we are supposed to do what they call conversion. Okay, so that means here I'm supposed to convert by wrapping it into a method called int. That means I'll do int, then I'll wrap the message into that int. Okay, so if I try running this program again and I enter 40, okay, so you see I have an error here, and the error is due to the typing. Okay, so like I told you in one of the previous videos, that actually we do data types in Python, but Python do what they call implicit variable declaration. That means within the Python program itself, it knows that okay, this one is an integer, or this one is a string, or this one is a boolean, even when you didn't explicitly define it in your program. Okay, so that is why we are having the program. You can see can only concatenate string, not int. Okay, so because we converted this to int, that means here for us to append it to this string, we also need to cover it again. Okay, we also need to cover it again with a string method and put the a inside the string before our program will be able to print normally. Okay, so if I print the program again, we're going to see that everything works fine, and this time around it is an integer variable. Okay, now going back to Java. Okay, now we already have integer, we declare the variable int a here in Java. Okay, so that means we already have it as an integer. Okay, so for us to accept anything automatically, to avoid a conversion, to avoid converting it from integer to string and what have you, we can simply say next int, because in this scanner there is a method called next int. Okay, we have next byte, we have next short, we have next double, we have next and next line. Okay, if I want to work with a string, I will just simply say next. Okay, now when I say next, sorry, next byte is also an integer data type. Okay, so when I say next, you can see the error I'm getting there. It said requires int found java.lang.string. That means it's saying string instead of integer. You remember the variable is an integer from what you can see there. Okay, so same thing applies to if I want to use a boolean, I'll simply say next boolean. Okay, or next double if I'm using a double data type. Okay, so since we're using integer, we just say next int. Okay, so this will now make us not to do the conversions just like what we did in Python. Okay, so with this we can simply now print our program, the attributes, by saying system.out, okay, dot print ln. Okay, then like we did in QBasic and Python, we simply added the value, that is a message, the value you entered, okay, is, okay, then we'll simply do a concatenation. In Java, concatenation is also a. Okay, so remember we did something like a message, okay, telling the user to accept or to enter a value. We didn't do that message here, so our program will not really be that user friendly. So we can simply also do a message at the top here by saying enter any integer value. Okay, enter any integer value. Okay, so this is the same program in Java. Okay, now the question is, why is Java such, I wouldn't like to call it a pain, okay? Or why is Java like this? Why is Java different from other language? Now, the answer to that is number one, there are a lot of things that the other language made very, very easy for you. Like in Python, you don't need to declare variable in the first place. So you can see in Python, the input is available for you. You can just accept input just like that without building an input object, an object that you can use as input. It's just available out of the blue for you. Okay, so that is just the difference. But in other programming language, and if you really want to understand how this whole thing works, okay, now there is what we call abstraction in programming. We're also going to talk about abstraction as time goes on. Okay, now what Python did, or what QBasic did, was abstraction. Okay, they abstracted the functionalities, or what will enable your program to synchronize with the input devices. They abstracted it for you and provided you a method that will do that. Okay, so but this thing you're doing, this thing the scanner is doing, is also happening in the QBasic or in the Python. That means within the program or within the IDE, there are things that enables the program to communicate effectively with the keyboard. Okay, communicate effectively with the keyboard, accept data from the keyboard, and store those data into the necessary variables. Okay, so in Java, we have to do it ourselves, and that is why it's a little bit tedious in Java. Okay, but in Python or in QBasic, you don't have to bother about that. You just have to go straight into your program and write your program to get your possible outputs. Okay, now these are some of the things we're going to be seeing, and that is one of the reasons why I love using Java, because it's to just tell you, or Java will expose you to a lot of concepts that are happening behind the scene. Remember what I said when we started the series? I said we're not really dealing with software development, even though we're going to see a little of it at the end of this series. We are dealing with the fundamentals of programming. And when we say fundamentals, the core concept of programming, the principles of programming, what happens when you write a program, is not all about just writing the program and getting results, but understanding every bit of what is happening in the program. And that is why we are taking our time to talk about these various things in depth. Okay, even as simple as they are this very moment, because we are simply still working on the elementary aspect of programming, but everything we've done in the previous video are still elementary concepts. Okay, I think this is the first a little bit advanced concept we've talked about. Okay, and as we go on, we're going to be talking about more advanced concepts. Okay, so let's run this program and see if the output is going to give us the same thing like what we have in QBasic and Python. Okay, so the program asks me what's my name. Sorry. This, I think this is not my main program, so that's why it's running this. Let me just stop this. Okay, so what we'll do, we'll right click here and say run file. Okay, so it said enter an integer value. Okay, so maybe I enter 50. I said the value you entered is 50. Okay, so as simple as the program is, you should see a lot of things that we've done so far. We've done the variable declaration, which is what we're seeing here. We've done the output statement, which is what you're seeing here. And now we just did the input statement. And the input statement in Java warrants us to instantiate a new object of scanner, and the scanner came from a Java standard library in the UT package, and we have to import it into our program before we make use of it. But in our Python, we didn't do anything of such because everything has been done for us underneath. So what we just need to do is just go straight to the problem and solve the problem. Okay, so that is it for this video. In the next video, we're going to be looking at operators and their order of precedence. Then after we've looked at operators and their order of precedence, we're going to solve some problems. Okay, now putting everything we've learned together and solve some series of problems. Now after we must have solved at least between 3 to 5 different problems together, then we can now move ahead to control structures. Okay, now before we go, let's just look at our syllabus again. Okay, so this is our outline. Okay, we said what's programming. We've seen what programming is. We've seen syntax and semantics. We've seen program statements in various languages. For now, we're still working with QBasic, Java, and Python. We've seen output statement in these 3 different languages. We've seen variables and constants. Okay, I think we didn't really throw much light on constants, but we're going to create a video on it as well, or maybe some of this work that we'll be doing, we're going to make use of constants. We've seen our assignment statement, and we just saw input statements. Okay, so the next video, like I said earlier, we're going to be talking about operators and their order of precedence. Then after operators and order of precedence, we'll do some problem solving. We'll solve some problems using programming, then before we move to control structures. Okay, thank you for watching, and God bless you.